Our agenda will more or less resemble the manual for role-playing games. Perhaps if you saw this kind of a title, maybe some of you have played some role-playing games. So we start with the introduction to our 4 characters. Then we move to a background. We can call this chapter a mechanics. So I will explain why those 4 characters were chosen, what's the science behind that. Then we will move to more details about those characters, so their strengths, weaknesses, and how that all works. The 4th chapter would be the role-playing, so how the manual, how to play the game of communication. So more direct tips on communication, preparation, and how to play with our characters. And there's the last session, it's called advanced. Sometimes those type of last section is called miscellanea. If you don't know how to call the last section of the presentation with some general info, the miscellanea works quite fine. So let's start with our introduction. So first we have the red fighter. I will be using colors interchangeably with the names of these characters. I will get to why in a few minutes. Fighter is based on strengths. Usually in some role-playing systems, you have several attributes that describe characters, such as strength, agility, intelligence, charisma, and stuff like this. And often the character is based on one of them, right? So fighter is based on strength. Fighter can do a lot of damage. Fighter likes to get close, so he can quickly slash some orcs or goblins on the battlefield, or tasks in Jira, or items in the backlog. And in general, do and receive a lot of damage. Then we have our yellow Bard. Bard is based on charisma. So the Bard has this aura of creativity, of happiness, positivity, this auras of +2 to morale of every person in the team, right? It's kind of like a support, but also the face of the master communicator. He can get the job done just by talking to other people and fix some things. And we have our green Druid. So Druid is based on perception, but also wisdom. So Druid can see a lot and also understand a lot on deeper level. There are also a bit of the support in the team, but more on the healer, guardian side. So they are fixing some conflict, helping others, and stuff like this. And then we have our blue wizards, which is based on the raw intelligence, right? He likes to keep a little bit in a distance, but he can still do a lot of damage on the battlefield or in our Jira, and he knows quite a lot. So what's the point of all of that? I'll be talking about communication, so how to talk to this type of personalities, how to approach, how to talk one-on-one, but also how to prepare presentation, agenda for the meeting, or if you are sending emails or whatever like that. And also we look at the strength, how to leverage those, and at some weaknesses or shadows that we should be aware. So let's start with a little bit of background, so mechanics. So basically, since millennia, there was this idea that we have different types of personalities. They are often connected with elementals. So there are people that were like fire, like out of action, out of energy. There were people that are like air, or maybe flowing like a water, or maybe solid as a rock. Sometimes we use animals for that. So maybe there was somebody who was like a tiger, or like elephant, or like a bird, or something like that. Around 2,500 years ago, there was this famous humor theory by Hippocrates and later Galen that depending on the ratio of certain fluids in your body, such as blood or bile or phlegm, it will behave differently. And around 100 years ago, there was a book by William Marston that described kind of like those 4 types of characters. Around 6 years ago, we started to do assessments to find out what's your actual character. And around 10 years ago, there was a book by Thomas Erickson called Surrounded by Idiots. And Thomas used those 4 colors that I mentioned to encode those type of personalities and describe how to work with them. So let's imagine that we have 2 dimensions on our personality. One dimension would be energy. So on one side, we have people that have a lot of energy. They are speaking loudly, quickly. They have this can-do attitude. On the other side, we have people who are a bit slower, a bit quieter. Like they prefer like smaller groups of people, a little bit introverted. So that's our one scale. And then the second scale is whether we are focused on tasks or on people, right? So people that are focused on tasks like to, let's say, play with technology, see how things work, they like processes, they are formal, stuff like this. And people focus on people, like, to have social connections, to make sure that everyone is happy. They are not that much into conflict because they prefer to resolve them quickly instead of being right, for instance, stuff like this. So when we have those two scales, let's assume that usually we are maybe not at the end of one scale, but not exactly on the middle. So on each scale, we have two possibilities. 2 times 2 gives us 4. So that gives us 4 permutations of our characters. So we have fighters, red fighters, who are extroverted, lots of energy and focus on tasks. We have our bards, who are also extroverted, but are more interested in people. Then we have our green druids, who are interested in people, but in more stable, calm, introverted way. And we have our blue wizards that are interested in tasks and rather introverted. So for some of you, maybe this is a bit familiar. Maybe some of you heard about the term disc assessment. So there is this idea, we have 4 letters, each represents one character. We have fighter who is dominant, bard who is influence, in disc, the druid who is on steadiness, and wizards are conscientiousness, or sometimes called compliant, sometimes it's called analytical, depending on the version. Now, of course, it's not that we have only 4 versions of people, right? So basically what happens is that how we behave doesn't depend only on our personality, but our personality, which is kind of created within first 20 years of our life, depends on our upbringing and also on the genetic lottery, so what kind of nervous system we randomize. So this determines our core values, kind of like attitudes, how we prefer to behave. But then on the other hand, we have the world, the environment. That's in different situation, you might behave differently, despite maybe you have some preference for one kind of behavior, but this might differ based on external stimulus. And keep in mind that this is just one of the models of personality. There are many. There are models with 4, 8, 16 types. There are just fluid scales with 5 traits, like the big 5. We have some models for strengths and weaknesses. We have some models for team roles, such as there are many of them. In general, all models are said to be false, but some of them are useful. So it's a good idea to not treat it, let's say, very dogmatically and religiously. It's just one of the possible ideas. All right, so let's move closer to our 4 heroes. We start with our red fighter, who is the dominant type on the extraversion scale and focused on tasks. So fighter powers effectiveness. Fighters are effective, efficient, determined. They basically can do a lot of stuff in short time. And they have high decisiveness. They don't need a lot of input to make difficult decisions. They are very brave. They can charge into the battle, or they can talk with the CEO or a manager who is like 3 levels of hierarchy above the team to get something done. And they are often quite ambitious. But there are, of course, some shadows to the fighter, right? Fighters tend to be a little bit stubborn. So they have the idea how to do things, and their way is the best way, and it might be a bit difficult to convince them otherwise, right? They might be a bit pushy. If they charge into the battle, they might trample some of their allies alongside. A little bit destructive because they don't care that much about how people feel around that, all those soft stuff, let's say, and there might be some quarrels if you need to convince fighter to something. It's sometimes a better idea to just back off at some point to save the atmosphere. How does it translate to the tech industry, to IT in general? So we all probably know this stereotype of the hero in the team, the person that can single-handedly over one day or night, like do half of the sprint, half of the task, push this to production, make it working. Maybe not all the edge cases, maybe just the green path, but in general, they can rapidly do a lot of work, right? If they use some technology libraries, they will use something that will just get the job done, not necessarily the newest one, the most shiny, more interesting, but just those power horses. They are great at resolving problems with production, right? If there is production is on fire and we need somebody to make a difficult decision, to have the guts to do this, it's often the red fighter that is the most capable of that. If we have to do some unexpected deployment to production, which is normally do automatically, or do something like that, like save the records in database with manual SQL or SQL, depending on the tribe you are in, query, red fighter is a good person to do that. And when we are in some estimation situation, some refinement, for instance, it might be common that the fighters will give you quite low estimates because they believe they will do it faster. They often do, not necessarily thinking about all the details. Okay, so I promised in the description some examples from the popular culture. So I'm not sure if there is anyone in the audience who doesn't recognize any of those 6 characters. So Game of Thrones, Friends, Lord of the Rings, The Big Bang Theory, The Office American version, and the Star Wars. Well, if there is anyone, then you have homework to do. So from examples, we have Daenerys, who is set on one goal to sit on the Iron Throne, and she can do anything basically, especially at the end of the series, to reach that goal. She doesn't really care about anything at some point. We have Monica, who is very competitive, right? When they are playing basketball or football or something, she just cares to win. She doesn't care that somebody gets hurt or feelings get hurt or legs are broken or something like that. We have Gimli. So when they are discussing what to do with the One Ring on the Council of Elrond, what they are discussing, should we cast it into the fires of Mount Doom? Should we use some magic on that? So what Gimli does is basically he takes his axe and he tries to smash the ring, right? So he prefer action before words. We have Bernadette, who has a very smart person, but with powerful voice that she basically uses to get what she wants. And we have Dwight, who is quite competitive. He wants to be the assistant manager, not the assistant to the manager, right? And we have the Darth Vader. Darth Vader doesn't like something, he will just choke the person with the Force. So those are examples of our red fighters. Moving on to our yellow Bard. So yellow Bard is the influential type based on the disk typology on the extraversion side and focused on people. So what are the powers of the Bards? Bards are those inspiring characters. They have this aura of optimism. They are charming. They basically boost the morale of the whole team. They have a lot of ideas, right? They are also often ideas that are very creative. So ideas how to connect things that don't really connect usually to each other. And they are master communicators. So they can get the job done. Instead of writing code, they can basically talk to people over the coffee machine, perhaps in the office, and fix you some stuff. What are the shadows? So Bards tend to be focused on themselves, so a little bit egoistic. They kind of overwhelming. So they tend to take all the air in the room in a discussion. They just talk a lot. They love the sound of their own voice, right? They're a bit undisciplined because they like some new shiny things. They are changing some projects. So basically, sometimes they leave the mess behind that somebody with more temper have to clean up after them. But how does it translate to IT? So yeah, shiny things. So new projects, new libraries. Bard would use a new technology or a new project just because it's new, because they want to try it, if it's nice, if it works well. The condition of being new is great here. They don't really like routine. So if you want to write a 20th endpoint or 20th test case or something like this, right, they quickly get bored and you will lose the Bard on that. But on the other hand, they are great communicators, right? So if you need to send somebody to the conference or present the demo of the sprint, what the team did in front of the whole company, or maybe some part of the company, if you want to get somebody to go to a conference and stand in our booth and talk to other developers to recruit them or to sell them something, the Bard is the great person to do that. And also they can do some work without rewriting the code because they know everybody around the company. They know the admins, they know DevOps, they know HR, they know what other teams are doing, and sometimes that is very helpful instead of just writing the code. Some examples then. We have Tyrion from Game of Thrones. You might think that Tyrion is an intellectual, so maybe he should be a blue wizard, but on the other hand, Tyrion is a party man. He always has the cup of wine in his hand. He's the master communicator, so he can basically talk to anyone, right? He can talk to a king on the throne. He can talk to a chieftain of some hill tribe. He can talk to a half-wit guard at the prison to get released and to get on his way. We have Chandler, who is the comic relief in Friends, who will be remembered very well. We have Pippin, who is the kind of like a musician, artist in Lord of the Rings. We have Penny, who is also a party person, right? She can basically talk to anyone to get what she wants, right? We have Michael from the office, who has a lot of ideas. He's here, he's there, he has this idea, that idea. Not necessarily good ideas sometimes, but he has this people aura around him. And we have Han Solo from Star Wars, the classic swashbuckler who often gets into trouble, but he's able to talk himself out of those troubles as well. So those are our examples of our yellow Bards. So let's move on to green Druids. So the S in this, the stability factor. They are on the introvert side, but they are focused on people. That might seem like kind of contradicting, but they just don't want to be in the middle of everything. They are rather in the background. They prefer the environment to be a little bit less loud, stuff like this. So they can be introvert, but still deeply care about people. What are the strengths? Right? Druids can shapeshift into birds sometimes or some other animals, right? But for certain, they are very reliable and stable. So they're like the core part of the team. If Druid says that he will do something, consider it done. They are very keen on supporting other team members, so helping them when they get stuck, taking care of some conflicts and problems. They are very observant, so they see what's happening, even if they were not in the room when there was an argument. When they arrive later, they can just feel that something is in the air, and they are very good with resolving the conflicts that happen. What are the shadows here? So Druids are often stubborn, but in a different way than fighters. They are stubborn not because they think that they are always right, but because they don't like changes. So if we do something all the time, it was working in the past, and why change it? They kind of cling to the status quo, right? They have this tendency to become stuck if they need to make some decision. They might be just stuck with those decisions. And because they like to help others, sometimes they fall behind with their own tasks, right? So tasks that you have in Jira and Spring Backlog with your name. And because of that, they might be prone to, I will fix those tasks later, so I will maybe stay over time. So you have to be careful with your Druids if they don't do similar things. So how does it work in technology? So as I mentioned, solid member of the teams, they also use solid technology, something that was proven long working, sometimes to an extent that this is a legacy technology. So maybe there are some security risk or something. They just tend to cling to this past and, hey, we're using that, this was working, let's not change something because this is a risk that something will break, stuff like this. But if you need a person to do a code review or to unblock somebody, to help somebody, Druid is the first one to help you. If you are in some estimation situation on the refinement, Druid might give you a higher estimate because they would like to have some buffers of security to be sure. Some examples. I have Jon Snow from Game of Thrones, who is basically the man of honor. He takes care of his team. We have Rachel, who is a little bit like an opposition to Monica. It's actually quite common that in TV series or in movies you have characters that are based on different types of personalities because they are opposites, and this creates some interesting dynamics and conflicts. So Rachel is this stabilizing factor in Friends. We have Frodo, who has this burden of carrying the One Ring, and he goes with that. We have Leonard in the Big Bang Theory. In general, Big Bang Theory is a little bit skewed towards introversion and task focus because this is a series about nerds, basically, right? But the Leonard is like the most, I would say, normal or standard or stable of those personalities there. So he acts like a glue for the entire party, basically. We have Pam on the reception in the office, who is also like the stabilizing factor in the company, and Luke, who is also a man of honor. He takes care of his friends, and he's on the light side of the force. Those are examples of our green Druids. Moving on to our blue wizards, so conscientiousness, so difficult word, like being in order, let's say. They are on the introverted side, and they are focused on tasks. So what are the powers? As you may guess, they have these powers of analysis. They are methodical, diligent. They can see exactly all the processes, all the mechanisms. They see all the details. They can do a lot of complicated things, and they are very prepared. They always think about what can go wrong, and they are often prepared for that. Right. On the other hand, they might seem like a little bit stiff and rigid, maybe too formal in their actions. They might seem like a bit distant and cold emotionally. It's difficult to get to them. They're a bit like killjoys. So what does it mean? Imagine you have a Bard that is coming in, the yellow Bard, and he has an idea. So guys, we'll do this, we'll do that. We'll have this screen, we'll put it on that server, the user will click, there will be email, there will be notification. All right, cool, great, let's do it, let's do it, let's do it. And then comes the wizard and says, all right, have you thought about GDPR, my friend? Have you thought about where we can store those credit card numbers? We can do this on this server, for instance, right? And all the joy is gone, basically. So they think about all those boring details that sometimes save our heads. And they tend to be perfectionists, so they will give you very best solution, but it will take a lot of time and it won't be cheap. How does it look in technology, right? So every time when you need to do some complicated research, some analysis to figure out what's the weak points of some process, maybe there are some gaps, maybe some missing corner cases, Wizard is the best person to do this. Wizard are great QA because they think about what can go wrong and they can test for that. They not only can produce a perfect software, but also they think about all of those stuff that is often kind of boring for many people, like those NFRs, non-functional requirements, like security, compliance, documentation, stuff like this. And wizards like to have everything in order. So examples, we have Varys, the Lord of Whispers from Game of Thrones. So he basically sits in the shadows and is called calculating, manipulating, not very emotional. We have Ross from Friends, who is the scientist type, right? There is this great scene between Ross and Phoebe. It goes over several scenes in the whole episode when they talk about theory of evolution and the creationism, right? And Phoebe is like, yeah, those are just theories. Everyone can like their own theories, whatever. And Ross is like stiffened, like, hey, it's not a theory, it's a fact. Evolution is a fact. It's a scientific fact. And then he proceeds to nag Phoebe over that, over several scenes. And so basically, wizards are clinging to this truth, data, facts, and sometimes they don't have this point where they just let go to save the good relations, for instance, right? I have Hermione from Harry Potter, so a little bit different selection of franchises, but he's the classic know-it-all in the class, right? I have Sheldon from Big Bang Theory, who is the classic mad scientist. So he's a brilliant physicist, but he has no idea how to deal with people. Right? We have Angela from The Office, who is an accountant, quite cold, not very good with people. And we have C3PO. It's basically a robot, so maybe not really personality per se, but a personification or metaphor. So he can calculate the probability of hitting the meteorite while flying through the meteorite field, but it doesn't really help the morale of people that are in the ship at this very moment. Okay, so those are examples of our blue wizards. And let's move on to the manual. So how to play the game of communication. Starting with a fighter. Fighters are all about effectiveness. They like to get to the point. They like to keep stuff short. So you shouldn't be, working on a lot of data, on a lot of description, on some visions. You just need to provide some points. Why are we doing this? Who should be doing that? If you have a fighter on the meeting, maybe you don't need a fighter for the whole meeting, maybe just for 15 minutes, and then you can just let go and do his stuff. So try to be to the point. Keep it short, think about agenda, everything should have a purpose, right? They are not really into some chit chat and spending time on some non-essential things. All kinds of checklists, like list of tasks, maybe subtasks, Jira, backlogs, etc., work quite well because this is something that we can move from left to right, that this is done, and fighters like that. They don't like wasting resources, so which may be time, especially their time, but also, I don't know, cloud resources or stuff like that. Stuff like this, they get annoyed around that. With a discussion, you have to be prepared that it might be difficult at some point if fighter has already made their minds and it might be hard to argue with them. So sometimes you have to know when to let go, but don't do this too soon, because then you might lose some respect if you're too soft, maybe with the fighter, and just agree to everything. So there is a delicate balance there. And be prepared for quick decisions. So if you go to a fighter to just consult something, it might happen that you will basically get out with a decision made. So maybe a commit, maybe a deployment, maybe a ticket created for admins or something like this. So be careful with that. What are bards? So bards basically care about relations with people. They like to talk with anybody. They know everyone. They know the name of your dog, of your cat, etc. So a lot of small talk. It's good to first get to know bards before you can actually do some business with them, right? So a lot of time for small talk. They have a lot of energy. This is basically a general tip about energy differences. So when you have a lot of difference between energies of two people, if you are, say, introverted and you're speaking to extrovert, you might try to match this energy a little bit. So maybe speak a little bit, faster, louder, something like that. If the opposite is true, if you're extroverted, you're speaking to an introvert, then maybe just calm down a little bit, right? Of course, it's difficult to meet in the middle, but you might try to kind of shift a little bit, and this will help the communication, right? So with Bard, we need a lot of time. Bard have this tendency to, stray away from the topic. So often it's good to moderate the discussion and kind of push it back to the right tracks. If you want to convince Bard to something, maybe you shouldn't go with logic and data. Maybe try to, look them deeply into the eyes and ask them how they feel about this, right? So what is the gut feeling? They operate more in this area. They like all kinds of overviews, the visions, the bold visions, the ideas, stuff like this, not necessarily the details and data. So you might want to start a presentation or email with that if you're discussing with Bards. They like to have fun in work. So to be fun, to be chill, to have nice atmosphere. I like to feel important. It doesn't necessarily mean like decision-making important, but in general, they want to be somewhere visible. They like to be shining stars, like go to the conferences, talk to people, etc. So make sure if you have bards in your team that they are made visible, they will be happy. Right, moving on to our druids. So druids care about trust and partnership. They are good in detecting bullshit. So if you try to, bullshit the druid, it will be quickly detected and you will quickly lose some points, right? They care about safety, predictability, sincerity. So basically, for instance, if you're a team leader, you have a druid and you have to announce that you no longer will be a team leader in this team, something will change. Maybe it's a better idea to first talk one-to-one with them, not announce this in front of entire team. Just let them kind of let the idea sink, right? Give them time to adjust a little bit. It was this great scene in The Big Bang Theory. It was about Sheldon, actually, who is more of like wizard, but there was a scene with the small fish and the aquarium, and somebody tossed the fish into the aquarium, and Sheldon was like, hey, you don't toss the fish into the aquarium, just gently put it on the surface of the water and let it adjust, right? So this is kind of like this druidic idea in our typology. Continuing, so druid might they are clinging to the status quo, so they might lose this vision of the goal. So sometimes you have to just talk to them and remind them why are we doing something. They like to support others, and also they need to feel that they are supported. And so if something goes wrong, if you're a team leader, it's very important to create this psychological safety, basically for anyone, but for druid especially. They might some help with decision making. They tend to get stuck there. So if there are some deadlines to be prepared, just maybe don't force them too much. Don't push them. Just negotiate a little bit, ask some questions. Let that sink in. And one important thing, maybe the most important here, because druids are focused on helping others, they sometimes tend to be behind with their own tasks. And now, if you have this idea of measuring velocity or effectiveness of people with lines of code or number of tasks that they do or story points or whatever, this might be quite hurtful for the druids, because in essence it might be the case that if you have removed the druid from the team, you lose the team, you would lose 2 points of manpower or something like that, because Druid was this person that was actually helping others and making all of that running smoothly. So just try to remind them that they are very important for the team with their help. Okay, so moving on to our wizards. So for wizards are focused on time, on facts, on data, on details. So whenever you communicate, prepare presentation, send emails, be sure to add a lot of data, some charts, some tables, some references to further reading and stuff like this, and try to be prepared. Right? Wizards don't like if somebody is not prepared for the meeting. Right? They will ask a lot of questions to the questions, etc. So make sure you have something to give them, right, to answer the questions. Sometimes they will ask too many questions and might get you irritated in the end because they want to, check every possible situation and corner case. So that's sometimes tricky communication. They also have this kind of hierarchical structured word, and this includes time. And from that stems that they are usually punctual. So if you're late to the meeting, basically you might again lose some points, easy points to lose with wizards. So be on time. Regarding deadlines and requirements, if you don't specify what you require exactly, for instance, if you want a wizard to create a car, then you will get a Ferrari. If you want to get Fiat Panda or something like this, you have to say so. You have to specify exactly requirements, otherwise you will just get extra, but it takes extra time and costs extra money, right? With decisions, wizards are based on logic, basically. They will ask a lot of questions, so be prepared to answer that, ask them questions, and you can, kind of arrive on some decisions in an algorithmic way. Right? Don't pressure them too much with that. And regarding moderation, they are quite quiet, right? Especially if you have a lot of bards or energetic people in the team. You have to make sure to specify some times for them. So you can say, hey, Gandalf, what do you think about this, for instance? And then Gandalf will say something, otherwise he might remain silent. Okay, so think about this when moderating meetings. Okay, so moving on to our last chapter, so the advanced miscellanea. By this point, you might have some idea which type maybe you are, or which type are your friends or colleagues, or this might be the opposite. So you think that, hey, this doesn't really make sense. I'm somewhere in between, or 3 types. And that's perfectly normal, right? Because, of course, it's not that we have just 4 types of people and only 4 possibilities. We have what's called in role-playing games, we have subclasses, specializations. So basically every fighter is still different a little bit, has some different style. If it still doesn't really fit, well, then think about multi-classing, right? So actually, in role-playing games, we can have multiple class. We can be bard/fighter, for instance. So in real life, it turns out that most people actually have 2 classes. So they have these 2 personalities that might be on a similar level. One might be a little bit higher, maybe a little bit lower. So we are usually kind of hybrid. Sometimes we are kind of in between 3. Thomas Eriksson mentioned that it's not possible to have 4. Probability would say that it is possible that you are in the middle on both scales, right? But statistically, you're rather, you have some preference this way or the other way, right? And also still remember that this is just, personality doesn't dictate how you behave. So you might change your behavior based on the external situation. Now, some classes work well together because they are on the similar place on one of those axes, right? So for instance, if we have wizard and druid, they are both on the introvert side, so they can work well because they are rather quiet. If you take wizard and fighter, they are both interesting in doing stuff, right? Maybe with less or more energy, but they can still work quite well. But on the other hand, if you have some opposites to work totally differently, this might be challenging. So in general, it's great to have them on the team, but maybe not necessarily a great idea if they just work together, like 2 people on 2 people task or something like this. This might be tricky a little bit. Probably you suspected that at some point this type of the slide will come in. So basically you have a lot of research that teams that have diverse roles or personalities perform better, especially in a world that is complex, complicated, unpredictable. with a setup of teams that are very autonomous, so they have a lot of different skills and they act. And they are not very constrained, let's say. They can do a lot, just have to figure out the way how to do this. And then if you have different perspectives, then you have an advantage. It doesn't work in very simple tasks, like, I don't know, if you're digging a trench or something, then it doesn't really matter. But if you have this knowledge work, IT, changing situation, difficult words, complicated words, then diversity helps quite well. So now let's think about some team tasks that we can undertake. So let's say that we have to plan an integration. We are going to a tavern for a beer, maybe some additional activities. We want to relax, right? Typical something that is happening every half of the year or something in the company. So how this might unfold? Usually the Bard will be the first one to initiate, right? So he comes and, hey guys, let's go for a beer. I have this great idea. I know this great place. Actually, I know 3 places. I know bartenders over there. I can get us a discount, right? Let's do this. It will be fun. So we are starting here. Then comes the wizard who can take care of the details, right? So you can create an online Excel, maybe some Doodle or some other software, or you can select the perfect date. So people can select that they are free on this day, free on this day. They could go on this date, but they prefer not to if possible. So wizard can arrange that, calculate the perfect time, send an email, take care of Excels, etc., stuff like this. Then our green druids will make sure that everyone is happy with that, right? So if we have some vegan friend on the team, he will make sure that the bar we are going to has some nice vegan option aside of water and fries, for instance. If somebody has too much liquor, we'll just take care of them that they get home safely, at least get to the Uber or cab or something like that. And then our red fighter will give us a difficult decision if there's a draw in time or place or something like that, and then he can lead the assault on or a tavern or the pub. Right. So this is the example of how different personalities can work together for a common goal. And now what happens if you miss somebody from the team, right? If you miss the red fighter, then there is nobody to make those difficult decisions, right? When we miss the Bard, there are no colorful stories or this fun and chill and poetry. When we miss the wizard, we have nobody to take care of the details. If we forget something, we are at risk. And then in the end, if we miss druid, it might be the case that we don't have a team, we just have a set of people that are going into randomly different directions. This might happen when we miss somebody. Okay, so we are nearing the end. So the QR code lists on my LinkedIn. You are all welcome to join. I'm also on Twitter, on the X or whatever it is called now, mostly some programmer humor, and also the same handle on Instagram. If you like those pictures generated by Midjourney, there is a little bit more there of similar style. And also, if you like to read or if you want to have notes from this presentation, I have a blog, How to Train Your Java. It's not really a lot about Java, since sometimes it's more about general software development and rather people were currently. So you are also welcome to check this out. And basically, that's it. So take care about yourself and people around you. Thank you very much. And maybe we have some questions now.
Thank you, Paweł, for your insights. As he already has mentioned, are there any questions left? There's a question in the chat. So what about the Dungeon Master class, the type of person who has years of project documentation entirely in their heads, and everybody is afraid of the day they decide to leave?
Dungeon Master, I like that. Yeah, I got some questions like, where is this class, or where is Rogue, where is somebody, right? But I had to choose 4 of them. But in general, I think this is the type of this hero, like this red fighter that I mentioned, the person that is basically long in the company, and this lone rider who knows everything. So this puts us at the risk of so-called bus factor, right? So if we have the one person that knows everything, it's good to take into account, to think about sharing this knowledge. That's the first important thing I would say. So maybe to have that a little bit, it's good to create in the company this sense of cooperation, so that people know that they can share stuff and knowledge with others, and it's not a good idea to keep it, for instance, to be safe, to not be fired or something. So it's a bit up to the whole company culture from the top, right? But we can all add a little bit brick to this culture, a little bit created by our teams, in our departments, etc. So I encourage you to do that. All right. Do we have any other questions? Don't see anything on the chat. If you are too shy to ask the question, you can, of course, just message me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. I'm more than happy to answer.